Broadcasting Authority of Zimbabwe announced the entrance of 6 more television stations in November 2020, it was met with a lukewarm reception from both the public and journalists. The awarding of 6 licenses to private players is expected to end the state broadcaster's effective 4-decade monopoly over television broadcasting. The Zimbabwe Broadcasting Corporation, inherited from colonial Rhodesia, has maintained its lone, rarely challenged presence in television airwaves. The spotlight has moved to the new license holders, who are, in many ways, linked to the ruling ZANU-PF and the military. The consensus is that it is yet another episode of media capture. In this documentary, we explore how changes in the media in Zimbabwe have an all too familiar ring to them. The battle for the control of the media casts a very long shadow dating back to the Rhodesian days into an independent Zimbabwe. The ruling political class remains a menacing threat to journalism. We also ask if there is genuine pushback from the digital news platforms. In 2006, Dumisani Mleya won the CNN Report of the Year award for covering the takeover of an independent newspaper, the Daily Mirror, by state intelligence. Mleya is convinced media capture is widespread in Zimbabwean media.
If you look at the history of the media, part of the media in Zimbabwe, particularly the public media or the state-controlled media, it was born captured. The roots of the public media, where they're looking at Zim papers, where they're looking at the state broadcasters, ZBC, formed under the Rhodesians. They formed them exclusively to promote their agenda of the time, which is the agenda of the regime to defend itself against the rising nationalist sentiment by the majority who wanted not just reform, but change. So that media, its genesis, it was established and founded in structures that were designed to serve the ruling elite of the time, not to serve the public interest, as it were. Yes, of course, from time to time on the surface of it, they will cover some issues that look like they are issues of public interest. But in terms of how they are structured, how they are controlled and run, they are captured beyond reasonable doubt. They get their mandate not from the public that they are supposed to save. That is in terms of their operational mandate. They get their mandate from politicians, from Mutapa building there, who usually use what are illegal means, clearly, to reach out to editors, to reach out to editorial structures in order to impose their own narrow agendas.
The narrow agendas that the media are forced to pursue attract scathing labels. Dr. Lighton Ncube is a media academic. Among other things, he researches the political economy of the media. He says the capture of public media has introduced some of the worst forms of journalism.
What we are witnessing at the moment, for instance, if I look at how the publicly owned or the so-called the state control media operate, I have noted with deep concern that perhaps they tend to practice in the past. Academics like the late Terence Ranger, they dubbed terms like patriotic journalism, but perhaps it goes beyond patriotic journalism. What we are witnessing perhaps is commissariat journalism. So at the end of the day, the media or these media institutions, they have been reduced to perhaps in the West African nations, they talk about the griotic tradition. They are more of griots, they are more of parodies of power, they are more of sycophants, which are always singing praises, but uncritically engaging with key issues. And they are failing to rise to the occasion. That's why I was saying we find them wanting when it comes to their expected role, perhaps as watchdogs. They are more reduced to lapdogs in the hands of those who are controlling them.
Media capture is multidimensional. Those who want to control narratives have learned that they have several avenues to force their will. Exercise of power is where they begin.
Legislatively, you have capture in the sense of media that operates on the basis of licenses, particularly broadcasting. We saw a recent broadcasting process that yielded, to all intents and purposes, licenses to people that are either directly connected to the ruling ZANU-PF, or they are associated with the ruling ZANU-PF. Or indeed, if they are not publicly associated, they've cut deals with the ZANU-PF. So that constitutes capture, because the licenses are issued on conditionalities, on certain understandings. They may not be written down, but it's understood that basically in this country, there is no genuinely private broadcast. I'm sorry to say, I know other comrades are trying very hard to open up the electronic space and the airwaves to alternative views. But the reality is that there are no genuinely independent broadcasters in this country.
Broadcasting is a contested media space in Zimbabwe. The ruling ZANU-PF has prevailed. The question of how matters as much as why. Broadcasts are the cheapest to consume and more widespread in their reach. Newspapers are relatively expensive, and they are a luxury of urban populations. Electoral power in Zimbabwe lies in rural areas, which is where the majority lives. The ruling party knows this, and controlling political narratives requires a grip on the airwaves. If a direct dominant monopoly is no longer sustainable, then you can rely on friends to pull a facade of multiple players.
If you look at the number of radio stations that have been licensed and are actually under Zim papers, and I think this one I have to stress also because it relates directly to, just the politics around the licensing of broadcasting players. You will remember that at the time that Nyami Nyami FM in Kariba was licensed, it felt like it was an independent commercial radio. But later on, it emerged that Nyami Nyami was under Zim papers together with Capital FM. So you continue to see an expansion, but on the other side, you're seeing that it's actually a consolidation of concentration of ownership of the media among a few, powerful individuals. Another thing that I should say also that we need to think carefully about is also just that this capture is consolidated in the existing media legislation that we had. And we see this particularly with the Broadcasting Services Act, which doesn't actually provide for the independence in terms of, the structure or the people who are actually licensing these entities. Yes, we're celebrating television, the licensing of television players, but one of them, as you can see, is Rusununguko Media Trading, who we hear is the army. So this is like a consolidation of existing political power, and definitely it will affect the agenda of the media. So definitely the media is captured in Zimbabwe.
You must have a government that calls for the application of licensing, because this is a finite resource. A spectrum is quite finite. So if you see a government calling for licensing, itself as a government should not be a beneficiary. Why? Because the government is supposed to be this arbiter, this provider of free space for various players. But if you see a situation whereby in one hand the government calls for licensing, and through its various formations stampede other citizens from accessing that same licensing regime, then we have got a serious problem. That's what we have seen in the last set of licensing, be it radio, be it television, tightening of grip of the ruling class. So it is by and large plurality without diversity.
Contestations that have always been there in the political field has spilled to virtually every sector. You name it. It could be in sport, it could be in religion itself. We've had the factional fights in terms of political affiliation and whether you are in alignment with ZANU-PF or the political opposition MDC. And the media have not been spared such contestations. So I'm saying perhaps the best measurement of whether the media in the mainstream are performing to the expectations of the people can be when we look at critical issues that need to be debated or discussed, and whether these are being given space and time in the media, regardless of the ownership. I would say, for instance, a good test measure would be the licensees, those who have been given licenses, making sure that their organizations are giving ample attention to the scourge of COVID-19? Are they giving ample attention to incidences of corruption and maladministration, regardless of ownership? That's the public service and the public good that I'm talking about. So when we talk about media capture, it becomes frightening. The word capture itself, quite often you think of abduction. Abducted from whom? Is it from the public interest? From the public good? So if, for instance, the Zimbabwean government decides to give people that are sympathetic to its licenses, and those people go on to serve the public good and the public interest, I will have no qualms about that, no problems about that.
You've seen the licensing of new TV stations, the licensing of new community radio stations. But you look at those, the TV stations, for example, the army's involved in various of those TV stations, and most of those new independent TV stations have some link to ZANU-PF. It's even true of some of the community radio stations. So I think there's definitely been a huge pattern of media capture over the last year, and that goes from radio to TV to legacy media. And I think that really leaves the the online space, the digital space, as the freest space, the most independent space, and the space with the most alternative media in Zimbabwe at the moment.
Private media in Zimbabwe are known to have a strong dissenting voice. Unlike the state media that has outrightly positioned itself towards a brazenly pliant editorial stance, private media accommodates critical voices. However, the dynamics have been changing in that sector as well.
When you look at the mainstream media, having spoken about the state media, you look at the private media organizations, I will not really take them by names there, but I will tell you that they are compromised very severely, compromised politically, compromised commercially, they are compromised by licenses. So you have a media that is mainstream media in this country that is no longer serving the genuine interest of the public or the public interest, that is constrained and compromised by their operating environment, which is characterized by political pressures, commercial pressures, and indeed legislative pressures.
There's another impediment, which obviously has to do with the broader economic spectrum, the broader economic sector, as it were, with its challenges, inflation, unpredictability, lack of investor confidence, and so forth. What you also now have are dwindling resources, and what that it has a ripple effect, because what you then have is you either have, is in our case, a media that is heavily reliant on the the state and its actors, or a media that becomes heavily reliant on capital, how then does the media play effectively its watchdog role independently and freely if it is operating under such difficult conditions? How then does it hold the state to account, the government to account, when it is heavily reliant on the tokens of government, or when it is heavily reliant on one or two advertisers? It's healthy to have as many businesses doing well in the country, such that there is multiple actors.
The tough economic environment poses more than advertising and revenue challenges. A much more sinister media capture tactic is becoming much clearer.
To introduce the dangerous dynamic that we are seeing now being more prevalent, the issue of equity or hostile takeover. This didn't start now, because you must look at what happened to the mirror of Ibo Mandasa. It's a simple case of a state that says, no, we need to silence the media. How do we ensure that equity is used as a trap? When equity is injected, they effect a hostile takeover of editorial independence. That is highly pronounced today. As you see that the media of yesteryear, which was highly pronounced on certain issues, which was so cunning in terms of coverage and reportage, strong editorial independence, loses the only tool at its disposal, which is the editorial independence. And this is achieved through capture. And without naming people, you can see that issues of press freedom, they are not isolated to the struggles of the day. The struggles of the day, including issues of women rights, issues of students' rights, issues of workers' rights, issues of democracy, issues of access to health, access to education, among other things. So part of it is to ensure that, as you heard the president saying, we have diffused the opposition. Part of it is also to diffuse the multiple layers of struggles that have been encountered by different centers, including the media. And in this 10, it's the use of equity to disable editorial independence on behalf of those that have been critical or holding dissenting views. A strong reportage, especially that promoted accountability.
If the struggles of the media are not removed from the broader political struggles of the day, what does this say about the state of governance? And what of press freedom?
What you have is an executive seriously conflated with the legislature and by extension, the judiciary. So essentially what you have, before we even speak of media capture, is state capture. The state has been captured in Zimbabwe, in the case of Zimbabwe, by the ruling elite who control the executive. I think there is one clip, and I think it was President Mnangagwa addressing a political rally where he proudly and unequivocally, said that they are the army, they are the police.
We must be respected. We are majority. We are the people. We are the government. We are the army. We are the air force. We are the police. We are everything you can think of.
Media institutions are clearly in a precarious position. They contend with multiple forms of capture. Journalists and their journalism are also at the center of focus.
You see, now when we were doing, being inducted initially into journalism, one of the things was that you had to set an agenda. And obviously that agenda is set by going to sit down and going through an editorial meeting where you you recognize your role as a public entity and your responsibility in the dissemination of news that is ethically, recognized in terms of a balance, in terms of also being able to understand that whatever is making the news at that time, there needs to be a varying opinion so that the product that you're taking out to the people is a product that will allow them to make a certain decision. So the media is supposed to actually empower people in terms of there's content that's viewing a governance system, there's content that's viewing an economic trend in the country, but what are the varying opinions? We're not seeing a balance in the news. We already know that if I want to have news content that is pro-government or will be a mouthpiece for the government. So if you look at the state media's reporting now, very rarely do you have objective analysis. If you find comment by a specific political analyst, it's going to be embedded in the preferred political, ideology that a newspaper follows. Similarly, if you want an opinion that's going to, be in line with the opposition, you obviously need to go to a more independent newspaper.
Right now, the other topical issue is around deplorable ethical considerations when it comes to the operations of the media, where you see that there's a clear disregard for fundamental adherence to fundamental ethical considerations when it comes to reportage. Issues related to balance, accuracy, fairness, and the likes, you find that there is clear disregard of that because of this issue of capture in this quest to always present news and information through exploring a certain angle or through reinforcing or presenting new biases that a certain media house or journalist seeks to present. You also find that as a result of this capture, there's also the rampant rise in issues of disinformation, misinformation, and fake news.
Perhaps beyond market capture and state capture, what we are witnessing perhaps is what I would want to term voluntary capture. I think to an extent, our journalists are submitting themselves to different kinds of capture, perhaps as a result of the VUCA environment that we have been witnessing, especially in contemporary times. From last year to this year, we have witnessed the cost of living. It continues to continuously sinking deeper into the doldrums. So perhaps journalists are somehow voluntarily submitting themselves to different kinds of captures, perhaps so that they can receive a number of freebies, so that they can receive bribes, they can receive brown envelopes. So this kind of capture at the end of the day results in journalists being pliant tools in the hands of corruption. So we find this unholy alliance, this kind of collusion, which is prevailing. It's quite symbiotic, but the benefits are quite mutual for the benefactors and their tools.
Of late, you'll see that there is a huge emergence of new startups in the media. It's a result not just of technological developments and the digital revolution that is going on. It's also a result of the compromise of the mainstream media that has led to the mushrooming of new startups, which are trying to push back against this state capture.
The mushrooming of digital news startups is a shift in the balance of narrative power away from established institutions to more diverse voices. At least, that is how it is imagined by those who are optimistic about these changes. It remains to be seen if digital media spaces can hold the fort, facilitate dialogue, and help build a formidable civil society as it is currently under attack.
Over the past 5 years, we have seen a slow-paced change in terms of media ownership strengths, media ownership changes, and we have also recorded a big number of fragmentation from those who are formerly employed in these big institutions, that is traditional media, and the emergence of the new media. that is utilizing the growth of the internet in Zimbabwe. So we now have what some others in other spheres have called startup media. This is small but effective type of media that has broken probably the most serious stories of the turn of our millennium. That is your issue of the COVID-19 scandals, the issues of how the military was going to dethrone the then founding head of state, etc. So this is type of an evolution, not revolutionary per se, but evolutionary in that because of the changing models of the media, we are seeing an emergence of a new crop of media.
That's the real new battleground, and the new battleground of ideas, the new battleground around how to build a new participatory democracy. And you see that in terms of the players that are on there. I think, players like Zim Live, who are, very much setting the pace in terms of the recent revelations about Kembo Mohadi, or Newshawks with their fantastic investigative journalism. Others like Hopewell Chingono and the work that he does in exposing corruption. So many of the kind of the agenda setting, the trend setting in our journalism now that's forcing politicians to respond is in the online space. I think you see that all the way through to your younger content creators and startups, your likes of Bus Stop TV, who use their humor to speak truth to power. All of these, I think the most important content creators, we find the majority of them online. So I think that's the new battleground of ideas, and a space that we really have to protect and make sure we keep it free.
We sort of want to believe that there's an expansion with the digital media. The environment has changed slightly because we have more independent bloggers and people who are producing content online. But we need to understand that they don't just survive by just channeling out that news. You will find that a lot of the online platforms with the Zimbabwean content that are popular also do command or draw in a lot of revenue through advertising by more, prominent players within the economic environment. So what you find is those online media platforms are more inclined to be politically correct as well, but they are also aligned to a more business sort of reporting. So there's no critique around corruption. It's more standardized news, which is more reporting on events. And also there's a lot of replication of mainstream media content. So you'll find a lot of these platforms online will be carrying a story that's already been run in the Herald or in the Newsday. So as much as we also want to start looking at the digital media environment as being a form of diversity, and also, just running away from the capture of the mainstream media, we are not seeing much of a difference.
COVID is going to be with us. Some predictions say in Zimbabwe, even up until 2024. So I think we'll be existing in a reality where it's it's semi-physical, semi-virtual, and so I think the media startups that have thrived under the lockdown in getting important information out there to people are going to be even more critical post-COVID, and much better at dealing with the new normal than cumbersome, big legacy media organizations.
Thabani Moyo believes that there is still room for discussion with the government. He says COVID-19 has left the media much more vulnerable, and the government has to facilitate media resilience.
For us, we have written to the government already to say we need to have a professional approach towards rescuing the media, a holistic approach of rescuing the media. Firstly, propose a media rescue package as a government. It doesn't mean that you have to pour in money. Yes, money you need to use. No. Just like what happens with the political, centers. When an opposition party has a presence in parliament, you use fiscus to support and strengthen the role of opposition in that country. So that is what we are saying with the press. You want a vibrant press to ensure that humanity does not slide back to the Stone Age polity and Stone Age era of existence. So the government can then set aside a revolving fund with low interest rates that the media can tap in to maintain resilience. That's the first one. The second one is that the media has got a multiple taxation regime that governs it in Zimbabwe. They contribute too many levies to too many fragmented bodies. If you are in the media, it's one way or the other, you shall contribute to the Media Development Fund through the then repealed IPA. You would then, contribute to the Broadcasting Development Fund through BSA. You would contribute to the Universal Services Fund through the use of telecom signal. You contribute directly through levies to the state. There's a 2%, there's this percentage, there's that percentage, all hemorrhaging the media industry. And above all, they impose these taxes not on profitability, not on profits of the media organizations, but on revenue. So it means that the media is suffocated from multiple angles. Hence, the government needs to review and effect moratoriums, tax moratoriums to the media. That when you have recovered, we are going to give you within this next 5 years, we are going to cut your contributions through levies. And then also consolidate these fragmented boards of revenue collection within the media for developmental purposes. And ensure that you stimulate media growth because these are the media industry structures that have contributed so much to these revenue pockets. Now they're in strain. Utilize the same pockets to ensure that they are resilient.
Back in 2004, media academic Dumisani Mboyo published an article on broadcasting policy reform and political control from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. He asked if there was a change without change in the media. It is 2021. There have been so many changes in the media since he published his piece. The media capture question is still asked today. Have these media plurality changes brought any change in the diversity of voices? Clearly not.